God's favor doesn't move according to human logic or timing. When we least expect it, heaven opens and releases blessings that our minds cannot comprehend. Divine surprises are the evidence that God's plans are far greater than our expectations. This is the moment when God steps into ordinary circumstances and turns them into extraordinary testimonies. When God decides to favor someone, He breaks every natural rule, bypasses every limitation, and rewrites human systems. Favor is not fair, it is divine intervention. It elevates people who were never qualified by human standard and sets them before kings. One touch of divine favor can do more than a lifetime of human effort. God's favor has the power to redeem lost years. What seemed delayed was actually preparation for acceleration. When the favor of God locates you, your destiny moves faster than time itself. He does not need permission from your past. His favor redefines your future. God will make up in one season what you thought you had lost in many. The greatest shock of favor is not only how high God lifts you, but how completely He silences every voice that doubted you. When favor appears, the enemy's plans collapse. God will turn every accusation into announcement, every rejection into recognition. Favor is the weapon of divine vindication. Favor is not a moment, it is a lifestyle for those who walk closely with God. The key to sustaining it is obedience, humility, and unwavering faith. When your life aligns with His purpose, favor follows you naturally. You don't chase blessings, they begin to chase you. God is not only about to shock you with His favor, He is about to make you a carrier of it everywhere you go. There comes a time in every believer's life when God moves in ways that completely defy human understanding. It is the season when heaven begins to speak and declare, I am about to shock you with my favor. In this divine moment, the limitations of logic, timing, and natural expectation fall away, and God begins to reveal Himself as the God of the unexpected. You may have prayed for years, waited in silence, or even felt forgotten. But the truth is, God was not denying you. He was preparing you for a moment which would shock even you. The season of divine surprise is when God steps out of the shadows of delay and manifests Himself in undeniable power, making it clear that no situation is beyond His reach and no life is too ordinary for His extraordinary touch. God delights in surprising His people because surprises reveal His sovereignty. When you think you've figured Him out, He does something that leaves you speechless. When you assume it's too late, He shows up early. When you believe the door has closed, He opens a gate you never knew existed. Divine surprise is heaven's way of showing that your timeline is not the final authority, God's is. Many people think God's favor is predictable, but true favor doesn't follow a calendar. It interrupts life suddenly and gloriously. One day you may be standing in the same routine, facing the same challenges, surrounded by the same limitations, and then suddenly God breathes on your situation and everything shifts. That's what divine surprise looks like, an unexpected manifestation of favor that transforms impossibility into testimony. Throughout Scripture, God has always shocked His people with unexpected favor. Abraham was living an ordinary life when God suddenly called him to be the father of nations. Joseph was forgotten in a prison when favor suddenly lifted him to a palace. Ruth was gleaning behind the reapers when favor found her and placed her in Boaz's field. David was tending sheep in obscurity when divine surprise located him and anointed him as king. The pattern of divine favor has always been sudden, unexplainable, and beyond human calculation. God works this way so that no man can take credit for what He alone has done. His surprises are designed to display His glory and remind His children that He alone is the source of every promotion, every blessing, and every breakthrough. When God decides to surprise you, He does not consult your past. He looks at your heart. You might have failed, stumbled, or been rejected, but His favor does not depend on your history. It depends on His mercy. Divine favor is not earned, it is released. And when it comes in waves that wash away every trace of limitation. God is preparing to shock you with blessings you did not apply for, opportunities you did not plan for, and connections you did not expect. The favor of God moves beyond human logic because it flows from divine intention. He knows when to move, how to move, and where to move. And when His time comes, no power can stop what He has ordained. The season of divine surprise often begins with silence. God does not always announce what He's about to do. Many times, the silence of heaven is the signal that something is being arranged behind the scenes. You may not see movement, but favor is being orchestrated. Just because God is quiet does not mean He is absent. His silence is often the soil in which surprises grow. He hides His greatest moves behind seasons that look ordinary. Then when the moment is right, He unveils His glory suddenly. You might feel as though your prayers have gone unanswered, but God is aligning circumstances, shifting hearts, and preparing people you haven't even met yet to become part of your miracle. There is a divine rhythm to God's surprises. He allows your situation to reach a point where human help can no longer suffice. He waits until the natural system fails so that His supernatural hand can be revealed. It is often when you are down to nothing that God releases something that changes everything. Divine surprise does not come to those who are comfortable. It comes to those who have been stretched, tested, and refined. It is the reward for those who kept believing when there was no visible sign, who kept praising when doors remained closed, and who kept sowing even in dry seasons. When you reach the end of yourself, you reach the beginning of God's shocking favor. The beauty of divine surprise is that it not only blesses you, it also impacts everyone connected to you. When favor visits your life, it transforms your family, influences your environment, and inspires those who witness it. People who once doubted you will have no choice but to acknowledge that it was God who did it. Divine surprise becomes a testimony that points others to the faithfulness of God. That's why when God decides to shock you with His favor, it's not just about you, it's about His glory being revealed through you. In this season of divine surprise, faith must remain your anchor. Favor does not respond to fear, it responds to faith. Even when things appear silent, declare that God is working. Even when the delay feels endless, believe that something supernatural is being formed. Faith attracts divine surprises because it pleases God. When you trust Him without seeing the evidence, He rewards you with manifestations that defy human understanding. The moment you choose to believe that your story is not over is the moment heaven begins to write a new chapter. Every divine surprise begins with expectation. You must position your heart in readiness, for favor flows where faith has prepared room. Do not limit God with small prayers or timid hope. Expect Him to shock you with blessings so great that even your enemies will marvel. Expect Him to turn your midnight into morning, your tears into triumph, your waiting into witnessing. The God who surprised Abraham, Joseph, Ruth, and David is the same God who is about to surprise you. He never changes. His favor is not a myth, it is a living force, and when it comes, it leaves no one the same. You are standing on the edge of a divine surprise. The silence was not punishment, it was preparation. The waiting was not wasted, it was positioning. The very area where you have faced the greatest opposition is the very area where God will display His greatest favor. Heaven has already written your miracle into motion, and the next thing you will see is the manifestation of God's shocking favor unfolding before your eyes. When the favor of God steps into a person's life, it does not follow the natural order of human systems. Divine favor breaks protocols. It overrides the limitations that men have created and shatters the boundaries that keep others confined. When God decides to favor someone, He does not need the permission of institutions, traditions, or qualifications. He moves according to His own authority, and His movement cannot be explained, replicated, or stopped. Favor is not bound by what society calls possible. It is the divine signature of God upon a life, declaring that His hand is upon you and that His purpose will prevail despite the opinions of others. Throughout history, divine favor has always disrupted human expectations. When God favored Noah, He saved his entire family from destruction while the rest of the world perished. When He favored Esther, she rose from an orphaned exile to the throne of Persia, breaking every cultural and political boundary. When He favored Daniel, he found honor in a foreign empire that had once enslaved his people. When He favored Mary, a young woman from a small village became the chosen vessel to bring forth the Messiah. In every instance, God's favor ignored protocol. It ignored what was logical, reasonable, or acceptable. Favor operates by a higher law, the law of divine purpose. Human systems are built to reward merit, but divine favor rewards obedience. The world measures people by their achievements, education, wealth, and influence, but God measures by the posture of the heart. When favor locates you, even those who are more qualified must make room for you. That is why it's called favor. It is undeserved, unearned, when often misunderstood. When God's favor breaks protocols, it causes others to wonder how you arrived where you are. It confuses the proud and uplifts the humble. It does not consult resumes, social ranks, or family lineage. Favor comes directly from heaven, and once it touches you, it makes you unstoppable. In human terms, favor looks like sudden elevation, but in spiritual terms, it is the manifestation of divine timing. God does not choose according to human preferences. He chooses according to His purpose. When He releases favor, He rearranges the environment to align with what He has spoken over your life. Sometimes He will move people out of positions, shift systems, or close certain doors, not to harm you, but to clear the way for your divine appointment. You may not understand what He is doing while it happens, but when favor manifests, it becomes clear that every closed door was actually redirection toward His perfect plan. Favor never comes to fit into the existing system, it comes to redefine it. The protocol-breaking nature of favor is clearly seen in the life of Joseph. He was a foreigner, a prisoner, an accused slave, yet the favor of God lifted him to become the second most powerful man in Egypt. According to natural law, this was impossible. According to divine law, it was inevitable. Favor turned rejection into recommendation. What others meant for evil, God transformed into promotion. No rule, no accusation, no boundary could withstand the power of favor. That same favor still moves today. It takes the least expected person and seats them at the table of influence. It takes the disqualified and gives them dominion. It makes what seems impossible appear effortless because the hand of God is involved. Many people think favor is only about receiving blessings, but true favor is about divine rearrangement. It shifts the structure of your environment to fulfill God's promise over you. When favor comes, people begin to act differently toward you without knowing why. Opportunities begin to appear from places you never approached. Doors that were locked suddenly open on their own. Favor does not wait for human approval, it compels it. Those who once ignored you begin to seek you. Those who once opposed you begin to recommend you. The reason is simple. Favor carries divine influence that human reasoning cannot resist. God's favor is often scandalous to those who do not understand it. It seems unfair because it does not follow the logic of hard work or human qualification. But favor is not unfair, it is divine justice. It is God's way of compensating for seasons of suffering, rejection, and delay. It is the heavenly response to earthly faithfulness. When you have been tested, refined, and proven faithful in hidden places, God's favor will publicly elevate you. He does not forget those who served him in silence. He rewards those who remained steadfast when others gave up. And when that reward comes, it often breaks every rule in the book. Favor that breaks protocol is also favor that cannot be stopped by enemies. When God decides to favor you, he can even use those who dislike you to fulfill his purpose. Pharaoh was used to promote Joseph. Haman's schemes elevated Mordecai. The rejection of Joseph's brothers positioned him in Egypt. Favor transforms the opposition into the foundation for promotion. That is why you should never fear the resistance. It often becomes the evidence that favor is near. The greater the opposition, the greater the favor that will be revealed. God uses what was meant to harm you as the very tool that will help you rise. When divine favor breaks protocols, it teaches you dependence on God alone. You realize that no man can open a door that God has not ordained, and no system can close what he has already decreed open. You begin to walk with a quiet confidence, not in yourself, but in the one who goes before you. The awareness of his favor becomes your shield. It gives you peace in the face of rejection and boldness in the presence of opportunity. You no longer strive to be seen because you know that favor will locate you even in obscurity. The spotlight of heaven shines wherever obedience dwells. This kind of favor does not just change circumstances, it changes identity. You begin to see yourself not as a victim of systems, but as a vessel of divine purpose. The labels others placed on you lose their power because favor gives you a new name. You are no longer defined by where you came from, what you lack, or what was said about you. You are defined by what God has spoken over you. Favor lifts you from the back to the front, from insignificance to influence, from ordinary to exceptional. It rewrites your story and forces the world to recognize what heaven already knew. When God decides to favor you, he breaks the rules not to confuse you, but to prove that he alone is God. The same God who promoted Joseph, who crowned Esther, and who elevated David is still at work breaking protocols for those who trust him. His favor moves beyond systems, beyond logic, beyond limitation. It is not dependent on your connections or credentials. It is dependent on his covenant. And when he says it is time, not even the laws of men can resist what he has decreed. Delay is one of the most misunderstood seasons in the life of a believer. Many see delay as denial, but in the kingdom of God, delay is often preparation. When it seems like heaven is silent and time is standing still, God is actually arranging the unseen details that will bring about divine acceleration. He is never late. He is always precise. There are times when you pray, fast, believe, and still nothing seems to change. You begin to question if God has forgotten you, but the truth is he is working behind the curtain, aligning every piece so that when his favor comes, it will not be gradual. It will be sudden and unstoppable. Divine acceleration happens when God compresses time, redeeming what was lost and restoring what was delayed in a single moment of favor. When God decides to move, he does not need years to accomplish what he can do in a day. The power of divine acceleration can lift a person from obscurity to prominence overnight. It can shift your life from drought to overflow, from confusion to clarity, from stagnation to supernatural progress. God specializes in redeeming time for those who trust him. While human beings live bound by clocks and calendars, God operates outside of time. He created it, therefore he can bend it, speed it up, or even reverse it for his purpose. What seems like wasted years in your eyes are often years of molding, refining, and equipping in his eyes. He allows delay to build capacity so that when acceleration comes, you can sustain what he gives. Throughout the Bible, divine acceleration follows divine delay. Joseph endured 13 years of rejection, betrayal, and imprisonment before one day of favor elevated him to second in command over Egypt. Hannah waited through years of barrenness before her womb opened, and she gave birth to Samuel, the prophet who changed the nation. Abraham waited decades for the promise of a son, and when Isaac came, it was not just a child, it was the fulfillment of a divine covenant. Every delay carried within it the seed of acceleration. When the appointed time arrived, God moved so swiftly that the waiting years felt like a distant memory. That is the nature of divine favor. It does not just restore, it multiplies. Delay is often God's method of preparation. He allows you to sit in seasons of stillness so that you can learn what cannot be learned in motion. It is in delay that faith is stretched, patience is formed, and character is refined. Many desire acceleration without endurance, but God cannot trust acceleration to those who have not been prepared by delay. What you learn in the waiting season becomes the foundation that sustains you when favor arrives. Without preparation, sudden promotion can become sudden destruction. God's goal is not just to bless you quickly, but to bless you permanently. So he takes time to build the vessel before he releases the overflow. Divine acceleration is not merely about speed, it is about alignment. When God accelerates your life, he aligns you with the right people, opportunities, and circumstances that move you toward his purpose. Things that once took years begin to happen in months. Ideas that once seemed impossible suddenly attract support. Favor begins to flow in directions you never expected. What changed? Not your environment, but your season. God turned the clock of your destiny and said, now, in that moment, every delay becomes a platform for divine acceleration. You realize that nothing was wasted, not a tear, not a prayer, not a single moment of waiting. Everything you endured becomes part of the testimony that glorifies his timing. Sometimes divine acceleration looks like restoration. You may have lost years to failure, sickness, or regret, but when God's favor comes, he redeems those lost years. The prophet Joel declared that God would restore the years the locusts have eaten. That is not poetic exaggeration, it is divine reality. He can restore not just what you lost, but the time it took to lose it. He can compress years of loss into a single season of blessing. What took others decades to achieve, he can grant you in moments, not because you are better, but because his favor has located you. Divine acceleration is the proof that God is able to redeem time and rewrite stories that seem permanently broken. Delay also teaches you dependence. When you cannot move forward, you learn to rely not on your strength, but on his spirit. This dependence prepares you for acceleration because divine speed requires divine guidance. Without it, you may move fast, but in the wrong direction. God allows you to experience delay so that you learn to follow his voice. When acceleration begins, that same voice becomes your compass. You will know when to act, when to wait, and when to speak. Acceleration without discernment leads to distraction, but acceleration guided by the Spirit leads to destiny. When divine acceleration arrives, everything changes at once. The same people who overlooked you suddenly begin to recognize your value. The same doors that refused to open now swing wide with ease. What once felt impossible now becomes effortless. It is not that you have changed your strategy. It is that favor has shifted your season. In divine acceleration, you move faster because heaven is pushing you forward. The invisible hand of God begins to orchestrate events so that every step you take is supernaturally aligned with purpose. You are not striving, you are being carried. The beauty of divine acceleration is that it often surprises even the believer. You pray for progress and God gives you multiplication. You expect small change and he gives you total transformation. It is the nature of divine favor to exceed expectation. God does not just restore lost time, he increases it. When Elijah outrun Ahab's chariot, it was not because Elijah trained for speed. It was because the hand of the Lord came upon him. That same hand is the symbol of divine acceleration. It lifts you above natural effort and propels you by supernatural grace. There is also a prophetic principle hidden in divine acceleration. What once took years will soon take moments. You will look back at your journey and realize that everything began to unfold faster once you surrendered your timing to God. Acceleration follows surrender. As long as you try to control the process, you remain in delay. But when you release your plans and trust his pace, you invite divine momentum. The speed of heaven is not determined by your effort, it is determined by your alignment. When your will aligns with his, favor flows freely and time bends in your favor. Delay does not mean denial, it means God is building something bigger than what you asked for. He allows you to wait so that when he moves, the impact is greater than your imagination. Divine acceleration ensures that every promise delayed will be fulfilled in multiplied measure. When that moment comes, it will happen so swiftly that those who once pitied you will be amazed at what God has done. What seemed impossible for years will manifest in moments, not because you pushed harder, but because God decided that your season of delay has ended and your time of divine acceleration has begun. There is a kind of favor that not only lifts you, but also silences every voice that ever spoke against you. It is the favor that turns mockery into marvel, rejection into recognition, and shame into shining glory. This is the favor that God releases when he wants to prove to the world that his hand has been upon your life all along. It is not a quiet favor, it is a public vindication. When God decides to silence your enemies, he doesn't argue with them. He blesses you in front of them. He doesn't answer your critics with words. He answers them with wonders. The same mouths that once spread gossip will one day declare, surely the Lord has done great things for them. That is the sound of favor's victory song, the sound that silences every voice of doubt. The enemy's strategy is always accusation. He uses words, whispers, and opposition to make you question your identity and your calling. He knows he cannot take away your anointing, so he tries to attack your confidence. But when the favor of God steps in, every accusation loses power. Favor becomes your defense, your evidence, your shield. It speaks louder than lies, louder than criticism, louder than fear. It does not need to explain itself. It simply manifests. When favor begins to manifest, Even those who oppose you are forced to acknowledge that something divine is happening. God's favor has a voice, and that voice silences every other. When David stood before Goliath, the voices around him were filled with doubt and mockery. His own brothers questioned his motives. The king doubted his ability. The enemy ridiculed his youth. But when God's favor rested upon him, the same battlefield that was meant for humiliation became the platform for divine vindication. The stone that struck Goliath did more than defeat a giant. It silenced every doubting voice in Israel. That is what divine favor does. It turns confrontation into confirmation. It makes your victory undeniable, not so that you can boast, but so that God's glory can be revealed through your life. The favor that silences the enemy is not gentle, it is powerful. It does not ask for permission to shine. It shines because it carries divine light. When God favors you, He makes your success so evident that even your enemies must become witnesses of His faithfulness. This kind of favor transforms opposition into opportunity. The very attacks meant to destroy you become the announcements of your promotion. Joseph's brothers tried to bury his destiny, but their betrayal became the vehicle that transported him to Egypt, where favor raised him to rule. What looked like rejection was actually redirection. God allowed the pit so He could prove His power in the palace. The reason favor silences enemies is because it reveals what they never saw coming. The enemy expected your breakdown, but God brings your breakthrough. The enemy prepared your downfall, but God raises you higher. The favor of God reverses expectations. It turns failure into fulfillment. It turns last into first. And when that happens, those who spoke against you can no longer deny the evidence of God's hand on your life. They are silenced not by argument, but by manifestation. There is no debate when God's glory becomes visible. Favor does not remove enemies, it renders them powerless. God sometimes allows them to watch your elevation so they can see what happens when He decides to bless someone they despised. That is why the psalmist said, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." God could have moved the enemies away, but He kept them close so they would witness His favor upon your life. Their presence becomes the proof of your promotion. When favor begins to overflow, the very people who once doubted you become spectators of your testimony. This favor does not depend on the approval of others. You don't need to defend yourself when God decides to defend you. When you walk in divine favor, every accusation begins to lose its voice because heaven's verdict has already been declared in your favor. You don't need to fight for validation. God's blessing validates you. The moment He decides to show His favor, no human opinion can reverse it. He does not ask your critics for permission. He simply does what He pleases, and what pleases Him is to exalt those who have remained faithful in the face of opposition. Favor that silences the enemy also exposes the heart of the faithful. It proves that you trusted God when there was no sign of victory. Before the elevation, there is always accusation. Before the public favor, there is always private pain. God allows the tension so that when He moves, the contrast between your past and your present becomes undeniable. He lets your enemies speak before He silences them, so that when He blesses you, the glory is magnified. The greater the opposition, the louder the vindication. Every believer who walks with God must pass through seasons of misunderstanding and misjudgment. People will speak without knowing your process. They will criticize what they cannot comprehend. But in those moments, you must remember that favor will speak for you when words cannot. It will defend your name in rooms you've never entered and before people you've never met. It will rewrite opinions and correct perceptions. You may not have the chance to explain your story, but God's favor will tell it better than you ever could. In Scripture, divine favor often followed seasons of humiliation. Hannah was mocked for her barrenness until God gave her Samuel. Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, but favor closed the mouths of the lions and elevated him higher than before. Jesus Himself was despised and rejected, yet God raised Him from the grave, silencing every voice of defeat forever. The pattern is clear. When God's favor rests upon you, no enemy can have the final word. Their words may start the story, but favor writes the ending. This kind of favor not only silences enemies, but also restores confidence. When God lifts you after a season of opposition, your faith grows stronger. You realize that you were never fighting people. You were walking through a divine process. You understand that every false accusation was actually setting the stage for your next level. God allows your enemies to speak just long enough for their words to become irrelevant once favor arrives. Their criticism becomes the background music to your testimony. When favor begins to operate, you don't have to announce yourself. God becomes your announcement. You don't have to prove your worth. The evidence of His blessing does that for you. Favor turns every battle into a testimony, every wound into wisdom, and every attack into advancement. The tables turn, the voices fade, and only one truth remains. God's hand has been with you from the beginning. The favor that silences the enemy is not just about victory, it is about vindication. It is the divine declaration that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and that every tongue that rises against you will be proven wrong by the manifestation of His blessing in your life. Living as a vessel of unstoppable favor means walking in a constant awareness that the presence of God within you is greater than any circumstance around you. Favor is not an occasional miracle. It is a divine atmosphere that surrounds those whose hearts are aligned with heaven. It is not something you chase. It is something that chases you when your life becomes surrendered to the will of God. The one who lives under divine favor walks differently, speaks differently, and sees differently because they understand that everything in their life flows from the grace and goodness of God. This favor is not seasonal, it is supernatural, and it transforms ordinary living into extraordinary purpose. To live as a vessel of unstoppable favor, one must first understand that favor is not earned through performance, but received through relationship. It is not a reward for perfection, but a result of divine connection. God's favor rests upon those who dwell in intimacy with Him, those who walk humbly before Him and trust Him completely. Favor thrives where faith and obedience meet. When you choose to obey even when it costs you comfort, when you choose to believe even when you do not understand, you create an atmosphere where favor can flow freely. The favor of God is attracted to surrender. It moves where there is yieldedness. When your life ceases to revolve around personal ambition and begins to revolve around divine purpose, you become a magnet for unstoppable favor. Unstoppable favor is not fragile, it is resilient. It does not disappear in adversity. In fact, it shines brightest in difficulty. The measure of favor on your life is not how easy things become, but how powerfully you overcome. When Joseph was thrown into the pit, sold into slavery, and imprisoned unjustly, the favor of God did not leave him. It followed him through every valley, opening doors and preparing platforms until the day he stood before Pharaoh. Favor does not prevent trials, it gives you victory through them. It does not exempt you from storms, it allows you to walk on water in the middle of them. To live as a vessel of unstoppable favor is to know that no season can cancel what God has spoken over your life. Living under divine favor also means understanding that favor carries responsibility. God does not release His favor for entertainment, He releases it for assignment. Every time favor comes, it comes with a purpose, to glorify God and to bless others through you. When favor rests upon your life, it is not only a privilege but a trust. It means you have been chosen to represent heaven on earth. How you handle favor determines whether it multiplies or diminishes. When favor increases pride, it weakens, but when favor increases humility, it expands. The vessel that holds unstoppable favor is one that remains empty of self and full of God. The moment you think favor is about you, you risk losing it. The moment you realize it's all about Him, favor becomes unstoppable. Unstoppable favor transforms your mindset. It teaches you to think from heaven's perspective rather than earth's limitations. You stop seeing obstacles as barriers and start seeing them as bridges to new dimensions. You begin to expect divine intervention in ordinary places. You understand that doors don't open because of who you are, but because of whose you are. Every step you take becomes a prophetic declaration that God is with you. When you walk with this awareness, you stop striving and start flowing. You stop competing and start creating. You stop fearing the unknown and start expecting the impossible. That is what it means to live as a vessel of favor. You operate not from effort, but from assurance. Favor also gives you access that cannot be explained by human logic. It introduces you to people, places, and opportunities that your qualifications could never earn. When favor speaks, rules bend, hearts soften, and paths align. People who don't even know why they are helping you become instruments of God's purpose. Doors that were once closed suddenly swing open, not because of manipulation or strategy, but because heaven has authorized your advancement. This is the difference between natural success and supernatural favor. Success depends on your ability. Favor depends on God's authority. One is limited by effort, the other is limitless because it flows from divine will. To remain a vessel of unstoppable favor, gratitude must become your language. The more you thank God for His favor, the more He multiplies it. Gratitude keeps the vessel pure. When your heart overflows with thanksgiving, pride has no room to grow. Favor is sustained by humility and fueled by worship. When you live in constant awareness of God's goodness, you attract more of His presence, and wherever His presence dwells, favor abides. This is why some people live in cycles of blessing, because they have learned that favor is not a moment to celebrate and forget, but a lifestyle to steward and honor. There is also a supernatural peace that comes with living under unstoppable favor. You stop worrying about competition, lack, or recognition because you know that no one can take what God has appointed for you. Favor means your portion is secure. What belongs to you cannot be stolen, delayed, or diminished. The world may change, systems may shift, people may come and go, but the favor of God remains constant. It keeps you stable when others panic. It makes you fruitful in famine. It allows you to prosper in places where others fail. When you understand this truth, anxiety loses its grip and faith becomes your foundation. Living as a vessel of unstoppable favor also changes how you see others. You no longer envy their blessings because you understand that God's favor is abundant and personal. You celebrate their victories because favor is not a competition, but a confirmation that the same God who blessed them is still working in your story. The vessel of favor lives free from jealousy, bitterness, and comparison. They understand that favor flows best for a heart that rejoices for others. Envy blocks the flow of grace, but gratitude expands it. The favor of God is meant to overflow. When you are truly walking in unstoppable favor, it begins to spill over into the lives of those around you. Your family, your workplace, your ministry, even your community begins to experience the ripple effect of the divine presence you carry. People begin to find peace near you. Opportunities arise through you, and hope is restored because of the grace upon you. You become a living testimony that God's favor is real and accessible. You become an extension of heaven's generosity on earth. Finally, living as a vessel of unstoppable favor means embracing a continuous walk of faith. You cannot depend on yesterday's encounter to sustain today's journey. You must stay connected, stay surrendered, and stay available. The vessel must remain in the hands of the potter. The moment you try to shape yourself outside His will, you lose the flow. Favor follows obedience. As long as you remain pliable, God will continue to pour out fresh oil, fresh opportunities, and fresh grace. The unstoppable favor of God is not a random blessing. It is the natural atmosphere of those who live fully yielded, fully faithful, and fully aware that they were created to carry His glory in every season of life. The entire message of Hear God Alone reminds us that the true essence of spiritual life is not found in noise, ambition, or the pursuit of worldly success, but in the sacred silence where the voice of God speaks to the heart. Each keynote builds upon the revelation that hearing God is not a single event, but a continuous posture of surrender, faith, and intimacy. When we learn to silence the chaos around us and within us, we discover that God has been speaking all along, guiding, comforting, correcting, and empowering us to live according to His perfect will. From the first keynote, we are taught that the journey of faith begins with the willingness to listen, not merely to hear words, but to discern the divine whisper that directs destiny. As the messages unfold, we learn that obedience is the sound of faith in action and that the voice of God is not limited by circumstance, culture, or condition. It reaches those whose hearts are tuned to heaven. Through the unfolding keynotes, we see that divine communication is not random but intentional, shaping us into vessels through which God's glory can be revealed on earth. The script reveals that hearing God requires purity of heart and consistency of faith. It calls us to remove the distractions that dull spiritual sensitivity and to embrace a life of continual alignment with His Word. The more we yield to His Spirit, the more our hearts become attuned to His frequency. Hearing God is not a privilege for a few, but an inheritance for all His children. It is the foundation upon which every act of faith, every miracle, and every moment of divine purpose is built. Through the message, we also understand that when we live in obedience to God's voice, His favor becomes our atmosphere. His direction brings divine acceleration, His correction brings restoration, and His presence brings transformation. The believer who walks in daily communion with God carries a confidence that cannot be shaken by fear or delay. Every test becomes a testimony, every obstacle becomes an opportunity, and every silence becomes sacred preparation for something greater. Ultimately, the theme of Hear God Alone calls every believer to return to the simplicity and power of divine intimacy. It is a call to quiet the world and amplify heaven. It is an invitation to live not by sight but by sound, not the sound of culture, emotion, or human opinion, but the still, steady voice of the Spirit that leads us into truth. When we learn to hear God alone, our lives become aligned with His purpose, our hearts become filled with His peace, and our steps become guided by His hand. This is where true strength, wisdom, and favor flow from a life that listens, trusts, and walks with God in every season.